Now, the outline of my presentation, what I will be speaking about is the international perspectives, keys to traceability success, brief history of what's happened in Canada, direction, where we're going, the collaboration of an industry government advisory committee that we have on traceability, the evolution of where we are today, where we want to be by the year 2011, benefits, been talked about in the last couple of days. Well, we're going to highlight some of what we think are benefits for traceability. I'm going to talk about, title of the presentation, Growing Forward and Government's Commitment to Traceability, and finally some conclusions. I want to leave you with some thoughts. Now, some of the keys to traceability success, and this is from an international perspective, primarily taken from most recent OIE conference that took place in Argentina. And keys to success, you've got to have legislative framework to make this a success. Efficient professional data systems to support user support. Government financial support. Governments have to be involved. Governments have to be engaged. It's got to be low-cost, simple, and accurate systems. You've got to take a look, or you've got to consider very seriously, a mandatory system. A voluntary system is a good start. It'll take you down the road somewhat, but at some point in time, a mandatory system will be key to a success. Got to be a consultative partnership approach, not only amongst industry and government partners, but amongst a lot of industry sectors to make this thing work, and governments, whether it's state or federal. It's got to be fair. It's got to be cost effective. Benefits have to be shared. There have been a number of studies that have demonstrated benefits, but I think we did a Google search, or one of my colleagues did a Google search yesterday on traceability benefits studies, and 369 hits popped up. There's got to be coordination amongst all players. We've got to have a vision, and you've got to have a plan in place. And the top-down concept doesn't work, but neither does the bottom-up. Now, the history of what's happened in Canada in the last few years. In 1990, we did have a National Advisory Board that was created to coordinate livestock traceability. And really, it wasn't, the overall discussion was about livestock traceability, but primarily it was about animal identification. In 1998, the Canadian Cattle Identification was created, and that in itself, in 1998, it was industry that approached government, federal government, and asked the federal government to be the silent partner in trying to introduce animal identification, and only animal identification. And it was interesting. We don't usually take a silent approach, but we quickly realized if it was going to work, industry had to take the lead. So we did take the silent approach. In the year 2000, we created National Livestock Identification for Dairy. In 2001, as was mentioned, regulations came into place for dairy cattle, beef cattle, and bison. Again, we are still the silent partner, and we were responding to what industry wanted from government. In 2001, Quebec became the first province to formalize its commitment to traceability by creating IGAC Traceability Quebec, or ATQ. And in Quebec, what they introduced in 2001 was full traceability, and it was mandatory. It covered the 3 pillars of traceability: animal identification, premise identification, and movement. And it was based on RFID. And what Quebec introduced exceeded the regulations that were put in place in 2001 for the national system. In 2003, creation of CanTrace, an industry government roundtable to develop national standards for full food chain traceability. In 2004, sheep regulations were introduced. So by 2004, we had cattle, bison, and sheep under mandatory animal identification regulations. In 2005, the Canadian Livestock Identification Agency was created. Industry group, and what they did was that they developed national standards for animal identification, premises identification, and movement for the industry. In 2006, So there's a lag from 2001 when the regulations were introduced. By the year 2006, we actually made traceability on the minister's radar scale. And ministers, when I say ministers of agriculture, federal, provincial, and territorial ministers of agriculture, actually provided the national traceability mandate. That they finally realized that traceability was of importance, and they said to their government officials, get involved and let's get going. And in June of 2008, Alberta investing $356 million towards long-term traceability strategy. Really, what Alberta announced in 2008 is what Quebec announced in 2001. Full traceability, mandatory from a provincial perspective. I mentioned to you in 2006, the ministers gave us the mandate to address traceability. And a quote from a communique that came out of the ministers' meeting, and I'll just read this. Ministers committed to phasing in an enhanced national agriculture and food traceability system, applicable to all livestock and poultry. They agreed to create an industry advisory group to work with officials and officials within the governments to provide an implementation plan. Within the national framework, provinces, territories have agreed to lead the implementation process for multi-commodity premises identification. So in 2006, the ministers not only wanted traceability for all agriculture and agriculture products, they did say they wanted to start with livestock and poultry. And they also agreed that the governments would be responsible for premises identification. And they also asked government officials to create this industry advisory board. But remember this, ministers committed to phasing in an enhanced traceability system. Now, the vision for this national agriculture and food traceability system, the vision for us is to secure a national agriculture food traceability system to better serve Canadian citizens, industry, and government. The system will provide timely, accurate, and relevant information to enhance emergency management, market access, industry competitiveness, and consumer confidence. And the details behind that vision is that what we took into account was an integrated system beginning with livestock and poultry. We want to respond to challenges, seize opportunities. We want industry and government to work together, because we determined collectively that neither one or the other could do it without a partnership. We want to have the capacity to trace products and products' attributes along the food chain, and those that will benefit will pay. We will share the costs, and that's something that I think you should realize, and that governments. It's easy. Usually in industry will say, well, government should pay. And that's fine to a certain point. But those that benefit should be paying. And if it means that government is benefiting, then government will pay. And we've agreed to that. And it'll be built on national standards. Now, I mentioned again that the ministers wanted us to create an industry advisory group, and that's what we did. In 2006, the industry advisory group was created. It comprises the federal, provincial, territorial governments and representatives, I've got on the slide here, from 20 national livestock and poultry organizations. Traceability service providers were also provided, organizations and traceability service providers was created to lead the development and implementation of the livestock and poultry components of that national agriculture food traceability system. Now, it was interesting. Governments approached industry at that time, and they said to industry, look, we'd like to bring you to the table to talk about traceability. And at first, realizing that no one trusts governments, the industry sectors were a little skeptical, wondered if that was a good thing. And in the beginning, we thought maybe we should just keep it to the 4 livestock species that the ministers asked us to address, and that's cattle, sheep, hogs, and poultry. And it was the industry sectors that said, look, no, we want to be at the table, we want to come to the table, but our counterparts, our other industry sectors, horses, goats, others need to be at the table as well. So that's why we have 20 national livestock sector groups at the table. Actually, we've got 22. So, you know, to have government and industry sitting at the table, but it's, you know, again, you have to take into consideration that this is an advisory group. It's not a group that will make decisions. It's strictly a table where we can come together and talk about traceability. Now, IGAC has taken the lead on developing traceability implementation plans. Again, we started with the 4 sectors, cattle, hogs, sheep, and poultry, but that's expanded. We've got implementation plans for bison, goats, horses, and others. And these implementation plans, what we've done with those is that we took the national standards that were developed by industry, we developed our government standards of what we require or what we think we require, and we use that to challenge the industry sectors. Can you meet these national standards that we've developed? A little more rigor to the standards that industry developed, but nevertheless, that's what we're using as the challenge with industry. And the industry has responded. They've developed their plans based on government's national standards. We certainly don't agree on all the aspects of the standards that have been developed, but that's fine. We're working through it. And IGAC has established a national livestock traceability data standards and performance targets. Again, we've taken the government and industry national standards, we've meshed them together, we're sitting at the table, we don't agree on everything, but we're finding solutions. Now, in the last couple of days, there have been a number of key issues that have been mentioned that need to be addressed for traceability, and they're no different in Canada. And those key issues include information sharing, cost sharing, communications, IT guidance, compliance and audit, voluntary versus mandatory, and research and development. So the issues that you're facing in this country, no different than the issues that we face in Canada. But the difference is we're working through them, and we're finding solutions to address each and every one of these issues. Now, if we fast track from 2006 to 2010, the ministers had another meeting. They usually meet twice a year. But this past July, the ministers, in their wisdom, with the exception of the province of Saskatchewan, and I'll quote from their communique, ministers committed to move forward on a comprehensive national traceability system for livestock and poultry, which is critical for managing animal health and food safety issues, as well as expanding market access and driving efficiencies. And if you'll see on the screen what's in bold and the difference between the 2006 announcement to the July 2010 or 2009 is that they agreed that a mandatory comprehensive national system for livestock will be in place by 2011, and that implementation will be supported by national funding and regulatory framework. Ministers committed to engage key industry groups on the timing of the implementation of each strategy and of each species, and the Growing Forward Policy Framework and Agriculture Flexibility Fund will provide support for key elements of the national system. So in 2006, when ministers announced a phasing in process, to 2009, where now they're looking at a mandatory comprehensive national system supported by regulatory framework. And the reason that the regulatory framework is there, from a federal government perspective, we have the ability to address animal identification and some movement aspects of traceability. What we don't have today is the regulations in place to address full traceability. We don't have, we can't cover premises identification, and we can't cover the rest of the movement activities related to traceability. So what the ministers have told us to put in place, regulations that will cover all 3 pillars of traceability. And we're to have that done by 2011. Now, the evolution from today, or really from 2006, and the reason that 2006 is there is because we haven't modified, changed, or updated regulations If you remember, in 2002, 2004, we introduced regulations for mandatory animal identification for cattle, sheep, and bison. Not much has moved from 2006 to today in regards to regulations. So what we have today, again, the first bullet, we've got animal identification for cattle, sheep, bison, preliminary work on premises and movement information. By 2011, we will have full traceability of most livestock, not necessarily poultry. And implementation plans will be based on risk and sector capacity. Today we have focus on data collection to support Canadian Food Inspection Agency's need for information to deal with disease outbreak, food safety, and emergency management. What we will have in 2011 is focus on legitimate multiple information uses by multiple users, supported by efficient data collection systems. We're going to have more information. We're going to have more sector groups that are involved in traceability. Today we've got a capable but independent traceability databases and associated infrastructures, primarily Canadian Cattle Identification Agency and IGAC Traceability Quebec. Those are both of our national data service providers. What we plan on having in 2011 is single window access to a number of databases, not only both CCIA and ATQ, but that operate according to national standards and policies. What we're looking at is developing a portal, one window of access to a number of databases. And we have an industry-led process primarily today, and that has changed and will continue to change. It'll be industry-government partnership, industry leadership with a clearly articulated long-term government commitment. And that's something that industry asked of government, because, I mean, time and time again, governments get involved in something, and of course the industry groups ask, are you in it for the long haul? And in most cases, we really can't answer whether we are or we're not. This is the commitment that the governments are making today, that we will be in for the long haul in regards to traceability and food safety. And just a few others very quickly. We've got standards that are largely developed commodity by commodity, and what we're looking at are national standards that will apply right across the board. We've got livestock identification, some traceability. We're looking at having in 2011 livestock and poultry traceability within a broader context of agriculture and food traceability. We've got a mixture of sector by sector, voluntary and some regulatory supports. We're looking at moving towards a more comprehensive regulatory framework. And of course, today we've got costs and benefits that are unequally distributed along the food chain. By 2011, costs will be shared across industry and government to commensurate with benefits received. Again, those that benefit will pay. Now, I mentioned that we'd highlight what we believe are some of the traceability benefits, and I mentioned to you earlier that there are a number of studies that have been conducted. However, specifically, what most of these studies do, the conclusion of most of these studies, what can traceability do for me? It can reduce costs in managing disease outbreaks. In an FMD outbreak in Canada, traceability could reduce costs by $21 billion. And that's the Canadian market, and it's a small market. It'll reducing impacts of zoonotics. It'll contribute to maintain and regain markets, and that our experience with BSE. Reduce costs in administrating animal health programs. Enhance animal welfare by locating animals during natural disasters. And it'll reduce the risk of unfounded liability claims by documenting who is not part of the problem. Now we've come to title of the presentation, Growing Forward, and it's the way forward. Now, in the last few days that I've been here in Kansas, people have asked me about the Growing Forward program. And it's not necessarily just a Growing Forward program per se. And what's not in my presentation, but I took off the internet that it's on our Ag Canada website. And specifically, Growing Forward, the title of Growing Forward, it's the new agricultural policy framework. It's what provincial, or federal, provincial, and territorial governments are working on as far as a plan is concerned. Governments are investing $1.3 billion over the next, well, now 4 years into Growing Forward and Growing Forward programs. Now, Growing Forward puts emphasis specifically on building a profitable sector through 3 strategic outcomes, and those outcomes include a competitive and innovative sector, a sector that contributes to Canadian society priorities, and a sector proactive in managing risks. In addition, Growing Forward will provide flexible programs that provide or better meet local needs, action on key regulatory priorities, and better service delivery for these programs to those that apply. Now, traceability fits prominently within the Growing Forward policy framework. Through Growing Forward, governments are providing over $100 million to implement traceability, primarily through 2 programs that are being made available to industry. And the first program is the industry infrastructure. It's a federal government-delivered program, national program to support national traceability initiatives with priority given to livestock and poultry. The other program that we have in play is a program that is cost-shared with the provinces, but delivered by the provinces, and that's on a 60-40 split, 60 federal, 40 provincial governments. And that provincially delivered programs to support individual enterprises to acquire traceability equipment, to put them in place to address traceability at the provincial level. And along with that 2009 July communique that came out of the minister's announcement, very shortly, hours afterwards, the Federal Minister of Agriculture announced another $20 million program through the Livestock Auction Traceability Initiative to support upgrading handling systems in auction markets and other commingling facilities. And that support's provided through Agri-Flexibility, as I mentioned earlier, a $500 million sub-program of Growing Forward. Now, do we think that $100 million is enough to implement traceability in livestock and poultry? Probably not. And the Federal Minister of Agriculture has said that as we move down the line, if more is required, then it's our responsibility to go get it. Now, governments are fulfilling their responsibility, in our opinion, when it comes to traceability in Canada. Implementation of premises identification and verification will take place, and the provinces will get involved. They've been given the task. They will get it done by 2011. As the ministers have asked, we're putting legislative and regulatory framework on a national level from a federal government perspective in place, again, for 2011. We're developing that National Information Management Solution, or the portal, that one window into many databases. We're exploring implementation of traceability in other sectors. We've worked with the horticulture sector. We've also worked with the fish sector groups, and others to address traceability. But again, our primary focus in the beginning will be on livestock and poultry. And we like to think that we are providing some leadership, cooperation, and communication for change. In conclusion, thoughts that I'd like to leave you with is the fact that industry and governments in Canada are committed to collaborate, develop, and implement traceability. Technology is changing, we know that. Include reliability, speed, training, support, adoption, and integration. But it's something that if you don't start today, there was a speaker that mentioned this in the last couple of days, technology's evolving. You've got to step up to the plate and make up your mind. Are you in or are you out? And if you're waiting for the perfect solution, you're going to wait a long time. So you might as well jump in and take a chance, work with what you have, and work towards change. There are economic challenges, including identifying and sharing the cost and benefits. we haven't done a very good job in Canada to highlight the benefits to industry, primarily to industry. When it comes to governments, I mean, for us, to have traceability is a big plus, and it'll help us in many ways to deal with many, many issues. So from a government perspective, the benefits are highlighted. We know what they are. When it comes to industry, we have to do a better job to really flush out the benefits, focus on the benefits, and then help industry from a government perspective. Highlight the benefits to all of the producer groups and to the grassroots. There's got to be a payback of some sort. And we know there is. It's just that we have to highlight them. We have to identify them and highlight them. And lastly, we've got dealing with issues around information sharing, compliance, audit, and mandatory versus voluntary. You had legal counsel up here yesterday. I mean, all of the issues that are related to information sharing, compliance, audit, privacy, we're going through it. And it's not an easy thing to tackle. And you know, again, because we have that industry government advisory group, what we bring to the table are government lawyers, industry lawyers, and you know, sitting around a table with the legal counsel is not a fun thing to do. But we're working through our issues and we're finding solutions. And proof of that is that we have memorandums of understandings now between Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Alberta government. We've drafted a MOU with between, again, the federal government and one of the data service providers, CCIA. And we're using those as templates to enter into MOUs with all the other provinces and anyone else that's involved within traceability that need MOUs in place. And this mandatory and voluntary system, again, as I say, voluntary is a good start, and you've got to start somewhere. But eventually, you know, if you want a credible system in place, you have to be considering and very seriously considering putting together a mandatory system. Again, there's so many gaps under a voluntary system that what we do and what we're very proud of, because we do have mandatory animal identification in place, when governments or countries that come to Canada and they want to take a look at what we're doing, we do have a mandatory system in place. We do follow that up with compliance and audit, so we're able to prove to these other countries that come over to take a look at our systems that we do have something in place and we can back it up. And the only reason that we can back it up is because it is mandatory. We do have compliance and audit systems in place. So with that, I've left you with some food for thought. And I hope I've given you a fairly good perspective of what we have been doing in Canada, past, present, and future. So thank you.